All right, my friends, we're almost done with doing our local setup of Kubernetes. We've set up our deployments, we've got the cluster IPs, our persistent volumes, secrets, environment variables, the whole shebang. The very last thing we have to do is somehow allow traffic to get into our application. Now you'll recall that we had previously allowed people to connect directly to the multi-client pod over here through the use of a node port. But a node port is only really good for use inside of a development environment, and we certainly want to eventually take this application into production. So rather than using a node port, we're going to start to wire up an ingress service to our application. Now in this section in particular, we're going to get a couple of words in on exactly what an ingress service is, but before we do, I want to tell you about the third type of service that we had very quickly mentioned exists, but didn't really go into a lot of detail on, and that's a service called a load balancer. So we're going to very quickly give you a brief overview on a load balancer type service and talk about why we're not going to use it. And then we'll move on to talking about ingresses and all that whatnot. All right, so for services, remember these are objects that are meant to set up some type of networking inside of our cluster. We've made use of a cluster IP, which allows other pods to get access to a particular service or a particular set of pods. We've got the node port, which we just discussed again, and the load balancer. Now, this is a legacy way of getting some amount of traffic into your application. You're going to see a lot of documents or blog posts refer to load balancers, but whenever you do, check the date on the blog post. It might be a little bit dated. And ingress is the newer and supposedly better way of getting traffic into your cluster. But again, quick discussion on a load balancer and why we're not going to use it. All right, so a load balancer actually does two separate things inside of your cluster. First off, to create a load balancer type service, we would make a configuration file of type service and a subtype of load balancer. When you set that up, you're going to essentially allow access to one specific set of pods inside of your application. Remember, the goal of a service is to kind of manage access or provide networking to reach a set of pods. And so a load balancer only is going to give you access to one set of pods. In our case, our application has two set of pods that we want to expose to the outside world, which is 100% common. Your application might need to have a very similar type of setup. So a load balancer would not be able to give us access to both the multi-server set and the multi-client as well. Now, when you make a load balancer service, you are not only getting access to a specific set of pods. When you make a load balancer service, Kubernetes is going to actually do something in the background for you as well. It's going to reach out to your cloud provider, so be it AWS or Google Cloud or whoever else you might be using, and it's going to create a load balancer using their configuration or definition of what a load balancer is. So in the AWS world, you might get a classic load balancer or an application load balancer. There's one other third kind of load balancer that escapes me off the top of my head as well. Kubernetes is going to tell AWS, hey, I need like a application load balancer or a classic load balancer. So it's going to set up this external resource outside of your cluster, and then it's going to automatically configure that load balancer to send traffic into your cluster and access the load balancer service that has been set up to govern access to this very specific set of pods. So that's what a load balancer does. Again, kind of a more legacy thing. Supposedly, some people say it's deprecated, but it's really hard to look at the Kubernetes official documentation and see something that specifically says deprecated. So I'm not 100% sure if it is deprecated, but certainly older way, and again, not really appropriate for us because again, we've got these two different things that we want to expose to the outside world. So with that in mind, we are going to be using an ingress service instead to get traffic into our cluster. So let's take a quick pause right here. In the next section, I want to give you a couple quick notes on ingress, some high-level things that you just need to be aware of. So quick pause, and I'll see you in just a minute.